For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. I'm at the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria to meet with Gareth Newham, who is discussing the need for an independent anti-corruption agency in South Africa. Why does South Africa need an independent anti-corruption agency?
Well, we all know that corruption is a big challenge facing South Africa. Even the government has identified corruption as one of the top 5 challenges, along with crime, that is undermining our democracy. It's diverting resources away from service delivery. We know that from what Willie Hofmeyer, when he was the head of the Special Investigation Unit, said in Parliament last year in October, that a very conservative estimate of about 30 billion rand is being stolen from government procurement every year in South Africa. Which means that with that money, if you could stop that money from being stolen, you could increase the education budget by 20%, the health budget by 25%, you could double the budget of the National Prosecuting Authority. For instance, we could have better trained teachers, nurses, more roads. So it's a lot of money, and that's a conservative estimate. Some estimates go as high as 675 billion rand stolen from the taxpayer since 1994. So you can see what kind of money has been taken on a regular basis, and this money, a lot of it has been taken with connivance of high-ranking politicians and government officials. So it's about tender fraud. For instance, we saw the whole Bekitsele police headquarters lease deal. That single instance with one man, businessman, Rishabunga, totaled around just under 1.7 billion rand. And he was going to make somewhere in the region of about 700 million rand profit. So you can just see the kinds of money that people are managing to get away with, stealing from the taxpayers. Now, an independent anti-corruption agency needs to be able to go after those kinds of people. We have the South African Police Service. If you have your cell phone stolen, or you're a victim of a house robbery or a car hijacking or assault or murder, the South African Police Service can deal with it. But when it starts going after very high-level officials, people who might be connected to the highest office of the land, the President, Cabinet Ministers, Director Generals, and those within the criminal justice system itself, you can't expect ordinary police officials to go after those people. If they're too vulnerable to manipulation, intimidation, and threats. And that is why we need a really independent, effective anti-corruption agency. And we've signed protocols internationally saying that that's what we will set up.
The South African Police Services Amendment Bill was tabled because the Constitutional Court ruled that the Hawks weren't sufficiently independent as an anti-corruption agency. Why did they rule this way?
Well, what happened was Hugh Glenister, a businessman, took the legislation that was used to shut down the Scorpions, which was a truly independent anti-corruption agency, and established the Hawks, which was a police unit. He took that to the High Court, which we lost. He then took it to the Supreme Court of Appeal and eventually to the Constitutional Court, which ruled that the legislation establishing the Hawks in its current form didn't provide with sufficient independence from political manipulation. Mm-hmm. So they found that the reason for this is that the Hawks report to the National Commissioner of Police. The National Commissioner of Police is a political appointee. That person has a 5-year renewable contract. If that person, for instance, wanted to start investigating any cabinet minister, the Minister of Police could simply stop that contract. The minister, because he's appointed by the President for a limited period of time. So there's a huge scope for interference in the police. And we've seen this in recent times, how much scope there is. Mm-hmm. And so the Constitutional Court looked at this and said, well, if you look at our international obligations, we said we would, when we signed various United Nations protocols, African Union protocols, SADC protocols around fighting corruption, that we would set up a really, truly independent investigation unit, an investigation unit that could not easily be subject to political manipulation, and that the Hawks were certainly not in a position to withstand that kind of manipulation. Mm-hmm. We only have to look at the arms deal with the Hawks, in spite of 4 million documents and a lot of evidence about corruption involved in the arms deal coming out of other countries, decided to put one investigator on that investigation before shutting it down without giving a clear reason for that. Mm-hmm. So it was clear that that's a political decision, because if they just followed the fact and law, they would have investigated those cases a lot more thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And so that is an example how the Hawks were not adequately independent and able to just look at whether there was evidence of corruption or not. And so it said that that's critically important. The head of the Hawks must be independent and must not report to the police commissioner. The deputy heads and the various people who work in the Hawks must have a security of tenure, because as police officials, the National Commissioner can redeploy them at any point, can fire them at any point for various reasons, and gives them the National Commissioner quite broad powers to do this. So at any point, Hawks investigators can be interfered with if they're going after very powerfully connected people. And so the Constitution pointed that these are the key flaws in the legislation and would render them not independent. And on top of that, they need to be seen to be independent. In order to gain public trust, people must know that if they go there with information that's implicating very powerful people, that the agency can act on it. And while the Hawks were in the police and people didn't have a high level of trust in the police, we've seen surveys showing that the trust in South African police is just under half the population feel that they really trust the police in any meaningful way. That means that too many people don't trust the police and therefore won't come forward with evidence to support investigations or assist in fighting corruption. So all that kind of was taken into consideration. They looked at international protocols and good practice, and then the Constitutional Court ruled actually we don't have an independent anti-corruption agency, and gave the government 18 months to establish a proper independent investigation agency that is capable of investigating corruption at the highest levels. And that is where the SAPS amendment bill came from.
Does the amendment respond adequately to the court's concerns?
Well, we can see that there's been attempts being made. The first problem we had was that rather than spend that 18 months, say the first year, consulting with people in government to investigate corruption, such as investigators in the Hawks, in the police, in the Special Investigation Unit, in the Asset Forfeiture Unit, so people with very hard and direct knowledge of how to investigate corruption and the challenges they face in South Africa. And then consulting with the public, with civil society, people who study this internationally, and coming up with a range of options, say 2 or 3 models, that this would what we could expect from a proper independent anti-corruption agency, then reaching national consensus about which model is best, and then drafting legislation to give effect to that model. That didn't happen. For a year we heard nothing. There was no consultation outside of the government, or even if there was consultation, the government was quite limited. And suddenly in March this year, the SAPS amendment bill is tabled, and it looks as if they've just done the bare minimum to try and meet the components of the ruling of the Constitutional Court. So rather than taking the opportunity to say, let's really establish the best possible unit for South Africa, to stop that 30 billion rand a year being stolen, to make sure we can really take those resources and help our people, they decided, no, let's see if we can just tinker with the legislation so that we can do the bare minimum to make the Constitutional Court or to look like we adhering to the Constitutional Court ruling. So what we have is what Professor Pierre de Vos, the constitutional law expert, said is the state law advisor has been instructed to do the impossible. Here you are trying to create an anti-corruption unit in the police and make it independent. So there's a lot of contradictions there. It tries to make the unit independent by saying that the Minister of Police will appoint the head and not the National Commissioner. Of course, if the Minister of Police is corrupt or is subject to investigation, there's no independence there whatsoever. There was increased security of tenure for the head of the Hawks, for the deputy heads, but it doesn't go far enough to protect the various investigators. So they're still members of the police service. The Hawks remain in the police service. The National Commissioner remains the accounting officer because they can't get around that because the Public Financial Management Act says that there can only be one accounting officer for every department. The police is a single department, has to have the National Commissioner as the accounting officer. So the accounting officer determines the budget of the Hawks. So of course, if the National Commissioner doesn't like investigations the Hawks are doing, he can change their budget, take money away, take resources away. Also, the National Commissioner, as the accounting officer, would have to get a detailed briefing on what they're doing to see that they're using the money that is being allocated to them effectively, because the National Commissioner will ultimately be held accountable. So if the National Commissioner is corrupt, you can certainly look at how the investigations are going. What money are they spending? What resources are they requiring for these investigations? So it just opens up a whole span of ways in which the Hawks can be interfered with by the National Commissioner. And so according to us, and 20 of the 21 submissions before Parliament of people who study this, ranging from lawyers, constitutional experts, civil society groups who study corruption, we don't think this bill goes far enough. We think it may pass constitutional muster according to the very strictest, narrowest definitions or ways of adhering to the ruling. But it's so far away from what South Africa needs to fight corruption. There's so much scope for interference in that unit still in the legislation that we don't think it's what South Africa needs, and we don't believe that if this legislation is passed, that unit will be able to achieve the kinds of successes against corruption that another unit that was configured differently and was truly independent would be able to.
Do you believe that the Hawks may continue to be subject to political interference and manipulation?
Well, we see that happening right now. We've seen the situation with Richard Madu, the head of the South African Crime Intelligence Division, The range and number and seriousness of the allegations are quite breathtaking. There are very few police officials who have had so many allegations from so many different investigations against him. We know that the National Commissioner of Police said before Parliament that powers beyond him were instructed certain investigations to be removed from the police, from the Hawks, and go to the Inspector General of Intelligence. They can only refer to the Mdluli investigation because we know of no other investigations that was of that nature. We had Macintosh Paleda, the spokesperson of the Hawks, saying that they were instructed to shut down all investigations into Richard Mdluli. Now, the Hawks were investigating based on the evidence and allegations before them, and they were then instructed to stop these investigations. Now, as far as we're concerned, that should be an illegal instruction. The Hawks are there to, based on the constitutional requirements and the existing legislation, where there's evidence of criminality, they have to act and they have to investigate. But that they've stopped these investigations strongly suggests, and gives a lot of weight, that there is a high level of political interference into their work, and that is undermining their ability to effectively fight crime and corruption at the highest levels of government.
What is your assessment of the decision to move Lieutenant General Richard Mdluli out of his position as Head of Crime Intelligence?
I think it's really public relations exercise. There's growing pressure from the public, there's growing pressure from the media and from within the ANC, because Richard Mdluli, the allegations against him are serious. There's quite a large body of evidence to support those allegations. These are not just statements people are making. There are investigative reports with detailed evidence about how he's looted the fund, allegedly looted the fund, and wide-scale corruption. It's not even a question that he appointed 7 of his family members to, or 7 members were appointed under him to his unit and division without the skills needed to do the job. So he hasn't just denied that. You know, he said yes, of course, but you know, it wasn't him. Somebody below him. Obviously, he's in charge, so he would have instructed those appointments or approved them. But the decision to move him is really done to make it look like they're trying to do something. But there are very few lieutenant generals at his rank in the police. So what's happened now is he's moved temporarily out of the post of the head of the Crime Intelligence Division. The people around him, some of them involved in the corruption, are still sitting in crime intelligence. So as still being on duty, he can receive information from those people and he can give instructions to those people in crime intelligence. He's now in the operational environment. There is really an operational divisional head, Lieutenant General Masomela, and so he's not going to be replacing that person. He doesn't, in fact, have to worry about the strictures of management responsibilities, because as a divisional head, you'd have to attend certain meetings, make sure certain reports are being finalized and sent through to the head office or to the National Management Forum. He doesn't have to do that anymore. So his time is actually been given more space and more time to do whatever he likes without being held directly accountable for it. So it's not really any punishment, it's not a demotion, it's freeing him up to do more of his own work or what he wants to do with less accountability. That is what people think. Well, that is what the minister thought would placate the people of South Africa, saying that he's been moved. And then another strange occurrence was the establishment of the State Law Advisor task team to investigate the allegations that Mdluli made against 3 or 4 very serious senior police officials who've never faced any allegations before except Beketseli, but he's suspended. And that is also a very strange thing to do, because the State Law Advisor, their mandate isn't to do investigations into police conspiracies. They're supposed to advise the government on law and legislation, and they haven't done that very well either in the past. So for some reason, this State Law Advisor, with some members of the police intelligence, military intelligence, who are none of them independent, are going to do an investigation into the allegations that Mdluli's made. So now we have the minister trying to pretend that something's happening with Mdluli when it's actually probably putting him in a more stronger position, and setting up a very questionable investigation into Mdluli's allegations, while not telling us whether he's still being investigated by the Hawks, when we can expect the Inspector General of Intelligence investigation to be completed, or why he's still in place. I mean, he was reinstated after the police management had very serious allegations against him, while 869 other police officials with far less serious allegations are suspended. So the movement of Mdluli was just a public relations exercise to try and fool people, I think.
Career policemen are seen to be demoralized by political appointments. Can you comment on this?
Well, from the police we speak to on a regular basis, it is having a really dramatic and negative effect across the South African police service. Many of the honest and hard-working policemen and women who are there to do their jobs, to fight crime, are dumbstruck and can't actually believe that somebody with so much evidence of wrongdoing is being protected at such a high level. and it is undermining their trust and belief in senior police management at national level. They'd simply stop trusting them. They also don't trust the Minister of Police. So this has just led to this massive breakdown in trust in the leadership. The leadership itself can't work as a coherent whole. We've had the National Commissioner Makunazi on SAFM last week saying that his generals can't work together and can't speak openly, and there's mistrust there. So it's taking police function or focus away from their key function. It's causing massive mistrust at the highest levels. And that mistrust is filtering down so that police themselves don't trust their leadership. They can't answer the questions they're getting asked at community policing forums about this, because from what they read in the newspapers, from the very glib and vague responses we're getting from the Minister of Police, they don't know what's going on. All they know is that something is very wrong in the police, and it's undermining their respect for the organization and their sense of morale. And I don't know how you can expect people to put their lives on the line to fight crime and corruption when somebody who's so clearly implicated is not being suspended and proper investigations allowed to go ahead. So really we see a severe failure at the highest level of leadership. The President and the National Minister of Police are simply failing the people of this country by not making sure that there's a full, thorough investigation into Mdluli, so that if he's innocent, his name can be cleared and he can carry on his work. If he's a victim of a conspiracy, as he claims, on the one hand, or on the other hand, if these allegations have weight, that it can be properly prosecuted and brought before a court of law, an open, transparent, fair forum where these allegations can be tested. That they're not doing that, they're allowing this situation to deteriorate so badly is, in our opinion, really flying in the face of what is required from the President and the Minister to make sure that South Africa is safe.